Imagine being told you don't belong while sitting quietly in your assigned seat on a business class flight. Naomi Ellison, a poised and introspective 16-year-old, faced exactly that when a flight attendant publicly humiliated her midair. But what happens when a single call from a daughter to her powerful mother sets off a chain reaction freezing over $1 billion and shaking an entire airline industry? This is not just a story about a seat on a plane. It's a story about dignity, silent strength, and how one quiet act of refusal can ignite a movement for justice. What does it mean to be seen in a world that too often judges by appearances? How does power respond when challenged not by anger or loud protest, but by calm resolve? And who really holds the power in the skies at 30,000 feet? Naomi's journey from silent passenger to symbol of change will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about equity, respect, and courage. Ready to hear the story that changed the skies forever? Hit like, share this video, and subscribe to join us on a powerful journey where silence speaks louder than words. Let's dive in. The hum of the engines wasn't loud yet, just a low murmur beneath the shuffle of carry-ons and announcements echoing through the cabin. Naomi Ellison stepped quietly into the business class section of Astra North Flight 604, her fingers curled around the strap of her backpack, her blazer buttoned neatly. Her passport peeked slightly from the edge of her coat pocket. She had everything in order. Seat 3A, window, forward cabin. She glanced up once, confirmed the number, and smiled to herself. It was the seat her mother had booked 3 months ago. Naomi had memorized the confirmation code. She always did. It was her first solo international flight, and she had rehearsed the process more times than she could count. Check-in, customs, boarding, she had done it all, and she had done it right. She slid into the aisle, careful not to bump the older man already sitting in 3B. He looked up briefly, nodded without much interest, then returned to his tablet. Naomi placed her backpack gently beneath the seat. Inside, everything was carefully packed: a sketchbook, a worn paperback copy of The Souls of Black Folk, a charger, her journal. She pulled out the book, settled into her seat, and took a deep breath. That was when she heard it. "You need to move. This cabin isn't for school trips." The voice didn't come from a fellow passenger. It came from behind her, sharp, dry, tightly wound in performative courtesy. Naomi turned. A flight attendant stood above her, tall and severe in posture, with a polished bob and a name tag that read Heather. Her lips curved in a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. No greeting, no offer of assistance. Just that. Naomi blinked, confused. "I'm sorry." Heather folded her arms. "I said, this isn't the youth discount zone. You need to head back. The economy cabin starts after row 7. Naomi glanced down at her boarding pass, then held it up. "This is my seat," she said. Her voice was quiet, but clear. "Seat 3A." Heather barely looked. "Let's not do this," she said, giving a small laugh that sounded rehearsed. "We've had minors try this trick before. Did you sneak up past the gates, or were you accidentally upgraded?" Naomi's stomach twisted. "No," she replied. "I checked in at gate C11. They scanned my ticket." The businessman next to her shifted. A woman across the aisle raised an eyebrow, pretending not to listen but very much tuned in. Another passenger leaned slightly forward, catching the energy. It was subtle, but real. Naomi felt her breath catch for a moment. Her hand rested on the edge of her seat, her fingers tightening just slightly. Heather's expression remained unchanged. "Miss, I'm asking you to move to your correct section before we involve security. We're trying to get the doors closed on time." Naomi swallowed. Her heart had started to beat a little faster. She could feel the warmth in her cheeks, but she didn't raise her voice. "I didn't sneak anywhere," she said slowly. "My mother booked this seat. She always does when I fly alone. It's seat 3A. You can scan it again if you like." Heather didn't even reach for her scanner. She simply stood straighter. "If you don't comply, we'll have to escort you off the aircraft. Do you understand?" Naomi nodded, but not in agreement. She nodded in understanding. That this moment, this pressure, this feeling was happening again. She'd felt it before, in stores, in classrooms, in neighborhoods that didn't expect her. But not here. Not 30 minutes before takeoff. Not while holding a paid-for seat. She reached for her phone. Not to film, not to post, not to retaliate. Just one press, one name. Mom. The phone rang once, twice. Then a calm voice on the other end. "Hey, baby, you boarding?" Naomi didn't glance at Heather. She stared ahead, steady, her voice soft. "It's happening again." That's all she said, because that's all she needed to say. There was a pause on the other end. No panic, no raised volume, just quiet urgency. "I'm here," her mother said. "Stay where you are." Naomi didn't reply. She lowered her phone into her lap. Heather hadn't moved. She folded her arms tighter. "Security has been notified," she announced to the cabin, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Please remain seated." Now the man next to her was watching. So was the couple across the aisle. Even the college girl 3 rows up, earbuds half in, had turned her head. The shame settled like fog, thick, unjust, undeniable. But Naomi didn't cry. She didn't move. She just sat there, holding her seat like it was her name. She didn't look at Heather again. She didn't need to. Her hands were still, her back straight. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., a protocol was being triggered that would ripple across time zones and institutions. But here, in seat 3A, all she wanted was to be allowed to belong. Naomi sat still, her eyes unfocused on the seat in front of her. She wasn't reading anymore. The book rested quietly on her lap, its cover slightly bent from where her fingers had pressed too tightly just moments ago. The hum of the aircraft remained steady, but something in the cabin had shifted. The air felt heavier, as if the walls had drawn in. She could feel them, the eyes, the quiet glances, some quick, some lingering, all pretending not to see what they clearly had. She hadn't yelled, she hadn't made a scene, but Heather's voice had been sharp enough to cut through leather and steel. And the announcement "security has been notified" had echoed through the cabin like a warning bell, as if Naomi were a threat, a problem, a disruption. The college girl in row 1 had removed one of her earbuds. She wasn't staring, just listening. The couple across the aisle had stopped whispering, now sitting in the kind of stillness that only happens when people don't know what side they're on. Even the businessman in 3B had started to look uncomfortable. He adjusted his sleeve twice, cleared his throat once, then went back to staring at the black screen of his tablet, not turning it on, not touching it, just holding it. No one said anything. That was the part Naomi would remember later. Not Heather's voice, not the threat, but the silence. It wrapped around her like static, the kind that numbs your ears but doesn't block the sound, just drowns it slowly. Her phone was still in her lap. The call with her mother had ended less than 2 minutes ago, but it already felt like a crack in a long hallway of glass. She breathed in through her nose, held it, then exhaled slowly. It didn't help much. The heat in her chest remained. That familiar, slow burn of being questioned in a space where you knew you belonged. She hated that feeling, not just for herself, but for what it did to her posture. It made her shoulders tighten, her jaw lock. She adjusted her blazer, smoothing the crease down one arm. It was a small act, but it made her feel like she could breathe again. Heather had stepped away momentarily, speaking to a crew member near the galley. Her arms were crossed, her face tight. She didn't glance back at Naomi. She didn't need to. Her message had been delivered, her assumption made, and now she was just waiting for backup to arrive and remove the problem she believed Naomi to be. Naomi sat straighter. She wasn't going anywhere. In her mind, she heard her mother's voice again. Firm, even, stay where you are. It hadn't been a request, it had been a shield. Judge Camille Ellison was never dramatic. Naomi had seen her hold an entire courtroom's attention without ever raising her tone. She knew how to move quietly, deliberately, and with weight. And when she said she'd handle something, Naomi believed her. Still, she couldn't help the flicker of doubt. What if the plane took off before anything happened? What if Heather got the last word? What if she was escorted out anyway and labeled disruptive on the flight report? Naomi swallowed hard. A memory surfaced, uninvited. She was 10, standing in a grocery store with her mom. Camille was talking to a cashier about the difference in price on a can of soup. Polite, calm. And yet the manager had walked over, towering above them, assuming there was a problem. Naomi remembered how fast his tone shifted once Camille handed him her judge's badge, not to threaten, but to clarify. Naomi had asked later why she carried it. Because I'm always expected to prove I belong. Camille had answered, and sometimes power speaks quieter than anger ever could. Now, at 16, Naomi was beginning to understand the full weight of those words. The flight crew began moving through the cabin, handing out water bottles and pre-flight menus. The lead purser gave a quick glance to Heather, who motioned with her chin toward Naomi's seat. Naomi watched the exchange, not obviously, just with that same trained stillness her mother used when sitting behind a bench. Every movement in the cabin suddenly felt exaggerated. The crinkle of foil wrappers, the overhead bin latching shut, even the ding of a phone being silenced. It all felt like it was happening around her, not with her, like she was in the center of a slow-moving storm no one wanted to acknowledge. Except one. The businessman beside her, the one who hadn't said a word, finally shifted in his seat. "Excuse me," he said softly. Naomi turned her head. He was middle-aged, clean-shaven, dressed in a tailored blazer. His tone was low. "I saw your ticket when you sat down," he said. "I saw the number. You didn't do anything wrong." Naomi blinked. It wasn't much, just a sentence. But in a cabin where everyone else had chosen to disappear behind politeness, it landed like a hand reaching through the fog. She nodded once. "Thank you." He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The intercom clicked. "Passengers, this is your captain. We ask that you remain seated as we resolve a minor pre-flight coordination. Thank you for your patience." Naomi's fingers curled tighter around her book. Coordination. That's what they were calling it. She didn't want to be dramatic. She didn't want to be the girl from the plane. She didn't want to go viral. She didn't want Heather fired. She just wanted to go to Zurich. She wanted to walk along cobblestone streets, visit art galleries, sit in cafes and sketch. This was supposed to be her reset trip, her breathing space. Her mother had surprised her with the ticket after midterms. "You need to see the world and know it doesn't define you," she'd said. Naomi had been excited, nervous, hopeful. Now she just felt exposed. She pulled out her sketchbook from her backpack and opened to a blank page. Her hand hesitated. She wasn't sure what to draw. The plane, Heather, herself. She stared at the blank space, heart still beating louder than it should, and then she drew a line, straight, firm, across the middle. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she knew this. She was staying in her seat. Judge Camille Ellison never kept her phone on vibrate. Most people found the constant alerts too disruptive. Camille didn't. She wasn't most people. As a federal judge overseeing aviation compliance and ethics contracts, she had long since trained her brain to filter urgency by sound. Every tone mattered. Every buzz had a purpose. The one that had just chimed, it wasn't ordinary. She stood in a sleek, windowed conference room, 12 floors above Constitution Avenue in Washington. D.C. In front of her, 3 senior advisors from the Transportation Ethics Board were debating clause amendments for regional carrier grants. Her notepad was organized, her blazer crease still sharp from a 5 steam press. She had been present, engaged, until now. That chime was Naomi's. Camille's hand moved before her mind fully caught up. She lifted the phone from the table, saw her daughter's name, just Naomi, with a little red dot beside it. That dot wasn't for emergencies. It was for emergencies that couldn't wait. She didn't hesitate. "Excuse me," she said softly, and stepped out of the room. The hallway outside was quiet, chilled from over-air conditioning. She passed 2 interns standing nervously with clipboards, nodded to the security desk, and slipped into her private office. A secure suite, soundproofed, with 2 phones, 1 cellular, 1 encrypted landline, and a biometric console built into the desk. She closed the door gently behind her, then answered, "Naomi." On the other end, her daughter's voice was calm, but Camille knew her child. She heard the weight underneath. "She won't let me sit," Naomi whispered. Camille felt her breath leave her chest in a slow exhale. She sat down, straightened her spine. "She thinks I don't belong here. She's calling security. I didn't do anything wrong. Mom." There was a pause, not silence, just stillness. Then Camille's voice, low and steady, "Stay where you are. Do not move. I'm going to handle this." She didn't need to say more. Naomi trusted her. Camille ended the call, placed her phone on the desk, and turned her attention to the monitor embedded into the wood paneling. With a single press, the screen came to life. A fingerprint scan followed. The system responded immediately. This wasn't a public-facing tool. It was Equicore, a live internal dashboard that monitored ethics compliance across 47 U.S. and international airports. Funded partially by federal aviation oversight and maintained by a coalition of ESG-aligned regulatory groups, it wasn't designed for crisis control. It was designed to track the moment before things became headlines. Camille clicked into the flight registry. Flight AN 604, Astra North Airlines, CA to ZRH, scheduled departure 9:42 a.m., cabin business, boarding complete, cabin full. Her eyes scanned the manifest. Row 3. Passenger name Naomi Ellison, age 16. Ticket status confirmed. No anomalies, no flags, no open reports, except now there would be. Camille opened the override tab. A blinking yellow prompt awaited authentication. Her hand hovered only a second before resting on the biometric pad beside the screen. A soft chime confirmed. New action request. Flag Tier 1 incident for immediate review. She pressed yes. A new window appeared. Input description. Camille typed quickly. Minor passenger complaint. Suspected bias-based interference. Non-compliance probable. Cabin business. Seat 3A. She didn't need to add names. The system didn't require them. It wasn't punitive. It was procedural. Across the dashboard, the ethics score for Astra North began recalculating in real time. The threshold hadn't dipped yet, but it would. The system had been designed with auto-cascading alerts. A red light blinked at the corner of the screen. Then a second. Camille picked up the encrypted landline. She dialed directly. The voice on the other end was familiar. Director Marcus Lee, Department of Ethics Compliance. This is Judge Ellison. We have a situation on flight AN 604. I've submitted a Tier 1 override. Please prepare for red level exposure. No soft close, no internal mediation. Document and escalate. The man didn't question her. Understood. She hung up, removed her glasses, and stared briefly at the dark reflection of herself in the screen. She had promised Naomi this would never happen, that she would be safe, that she wouldn't have to carry the burden Camille had carried for most of her life. But the world wasn't made of promises. It was made of systems, and today this one would speak. At the gate in Seattle, the ripple began. Inside the cockpit, Captain Ron Weiss had just settled into his seat, reviewing the weather conditions over the Atlantic. Clear skies expected. Zurich would be cold on arrival, just under 9 hours, routine flight. Until the gate phone rang. He frowned. Ground control didn't call unless something changed. He answered, listened. His brow creased. Understood, he said. Then he stood. The co-pilot looked up. What is it? I'm being pulled. Security notice. The crew barely looked up. These things happened until a second figure boarded the aircraft. Not a passenger, not security. A woman in a navy blazer with a laminated badge clipped to her lapel. Her expression was professional, not warm. She moved quickly, quietly. She approached the forward galley where Heather Connors stood reviewing the pre-departure checklist. Are you the assigned lead on this cabin? Heather turned, startled. Yes. Is there? Please step off the plane with me now. I'm in the middle of pre-flight. This is not optional. Passengers turned to look. Conversation dropped to murmurs. The woman's badge glinted briefly in the cabin light. Regulatory ethics oversight. Heather hesitated. Her mouth opened, then closed. She unclipped her name badge, handed it over, and followed the woman off the plane. Naomi sat in 3A. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't look around. Her phone rested in her lap, screen still faintly glowing. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the cabin had frozen mid-breath, a quiet theater of confusion where everyone sensed something had just shifted, but no one quite knew what. A few heads turned toward the front. A businessman lowered his newspaper. A toddler, 2 rows back, stopped giggling. The sudden silence like static in the air. Naomi felt it. The silence wasn't protective. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that came when people weren't sure what side to be on yet. Heather Connors had been removed with no explanation, no drama, no resistance, just a quiet request and a badge that carried more weight than her title. She disappeared down the jet bridge like a shadow being erased, and now, nothing. The other flight attendants moved with hesitation, polite smiles plastered in place, eyes scanning each passenger with practiced calm. One of them, a man maybe in his 30s, gave Naomi a quick glance. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't kind either. It was calculating, like he'd been given a puzzle with a few pieces missing. Naomi stayed quiet. Her sketchbook remained open on her tray, her pencil resting across the spine. The page held nothing but that single line she had drawn earlier. One stroke, solid, intentional. She didn't need to add anything else. Not yet. At the front of the aircraft. The captain returned from the gate. His brow was furrowed. His voice came over the intercom a few seconds later. Steady, but a little too formal. Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to inform you that due to an unexpected operational directive, this flight has been delayed. We ask that all passengers disembark and return to the gate for reprocessing. Please follow the instructions of our ground crew and remain calm. We appreciate your cooperation. The words landed like sandbags. Groans rippled down the aisles. Voices rose, confused and impatient. "Are you serious?" someone muttered. "I have a connection in Geneva." Another said, already reaching for their phone, "This can't be happening." A third groaned. Naomi didn't move. She didn't unbuckle. She just sat there, watching the shift happen in real time. The same people who had been so still earlier now stirred with mild frustration, not outrage, inconvenience, not principle. She heard someone near the back ask, what did she do, but it was whispered low, almost like they didn't want the question answered. It wasn't about her anymore, not in their minds. It was about a delayed flight, missed meetings, disrupted itineraries. They didn't know what had triggered it, not yet, but they would. A young woman in a bright yellow blazer approached Naomi's seat. "Hi there," she said gently. "We've arranged for you to wait in the private lounge upstairs. There's water, snacks, and it'll be quieter." Naomi looked up at her. The woman had kind eyes, tired but present. Naomi nodded, unbuckled her seatbelt, and stood slowly. She picked up her bag and her sketchbook. No one said anything as she stepped into the aisle. No one apologized. No one offered support. They just moved slightly to let her pass. She could still feel the eyes. The walk down the jet bridge felt long. The kind of long that wasn't measured in feet but in the echo of unspoken things. Naomi kept her posture tall. Her mom had taught her that. Walk like your dignity takes up space. Upstairs in the private lounge, the lights were soft. A quiet jazz playlist hummed from hidden speakers. She was offered tea. She chose still water. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she thanked the attendant. She settled into a wide leather chair in the corner, back to the wall, facing the room. Her phone buzzed once. A message from her mother. "I'm with you. You did everything right." Naomi stared at the words. She believed them, but belief didn't undo the burn. She hadn't cried. She hadn't let herself. But now, in the quiet, her eyes stung just slightly. Not from sadness, from the weight of being made visible in the worst way. She thought of Heather, the tone, the assumption, the way the entire cabin had watched the exchange like a tennis match, eyes darting but mouths closed. She thought of the man in 3B, The one sentence he'd said, the only voice that acknowledged the truth. Then she thought of her mother, Camille Ellison, the woman who had always told her that justice wasn't about volume, it was about precision. She could picture her mother now, seated behind her desk in deep sea, hands steady, voice measured, pulling the right levers in silence. Naomi didn't know what came next, but she knew it had started. Downstairs, on the tarmac, the gate agents moved with growing urgency. A call had just come in from Astra North's corporate compliance team, and it wasn't routine. It was a Tier 1 ethics alert, flagged not by a customer complaint, but by the federal Equicore system itself. Inside Astra North's headquarters in Chicago, a notification had appeared on the executive compliance dashboard. Red flag ethics violation suspected. Flight AN604, CZRH. Within seconds, subalerts began to populate. Pending ESG grant status frozen, airport access review triggered in Denver, Atlanta, and Boston, ethics score downgraded to provisional. The CEO's office was notified. Legal began pulling internal behavior logs. PR drafted a holding statement, just in case. No one had specifics yet, but the origin of the ripple was traceable. Flight AN604, Seat 3A, and a miner's name attached to it. By the time Naomi finished her water, a quiet storm was already rolling across 3 time zones, and she had said less than a dozen words since the boarding door closed. She stood and walked slowly to the floor-to-ceiling windows at the edge of the lounge. Outside, the aircraft still sat parked, its doors open, ground crew milling around in practiced choreography. She watched as bags were removed, as fuel checks restarted, as someone in a blazer with a clipboard gestured sharply at the cabin door. Her seat was still there, empty, quiet, but not forgotten. Naomi didn't want anyone to get fired. She didn't want revenge. She just wanted to sit where she was assigned without someone asking if she belonged. That wasn't ambition. That was dignity. And somewhere in Washington. Her mother was already making sure the system understood the difference. Inside Astra North's headquarters in Chicago, the tension was thick enough to taste. The executive operations floor was usually silent in the early morning calm, clean, tucked behind layers of security and polished glass. But by 9:58 a.m., something had cracked the surface. It began with a soft chime from the ethics compliance server, a blinking red notification no larger than a thumbnail. At first, it didn't seem like much. The system flagged incidents all the time, misfiled passenger logs, data inconsistencies, minor seat disputes, but this one was different. Tier 1 violation source Federal Equicore, trigger flight AN604 location CAZRH business class, subject minor passenger, 3A status non-compliant suspected. And then came the second ping, pending ESG partner funding 1.3B status, frozen, that got attention. The alert rolled up the internal systems like a rising tide. Department heads received automated emails. Risk assessment managers saw dashboards blinking red. Legal teams were pinged. Regulatory liaisons looped in. Everything about the message screamed urgency, but offered little context. One phrase repeated across every screen: real-time ethics violation, external authority override. In the corner office, Malcolm Drexler, the CEO of Astra North, read the report twice, then once more aloud. His voice was calm, but only because he'd learned long ago that panic didn't belong in leadership. The words still stung. He turned to his chief compliance officer. "Who submitted this override?" She hesitated. It was initiated through the Equicore Federal Console. That requires Tier 1 judicial access. Which Judge Camille Ellison? Drexler's jaw tightened. He knew the name. Most executives in the industry did. Judge Ellison was one of the architects of the FlySafe ethics reform system and a lead advisor for ESG aviation partnerships. She was known for precision, not theatrics. If she triggered the override, it meant something serious had happened. He tapped his pen slowly against the armrest. What happened on that plane? Still confirming, sir, the officer replied, but early chatter says it involved a young passenger in business class. A flight attendant may have questioned her seating legitimacy. We're reviewing the video logs now. Across the country, inside the FAA's Ethics Monitoring Division in Virginia, the dashboard began its own cascade. Under the FlySafe system, any Tier 1 override required automated alerts to be sent to all ESG-aligned investment groups, major international airports, and regulatory partners. By 10:06 a.m., Denver International had suspended Astronorth's gate access pending review. By 10:09 a.m., Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International followed suit. By 10:12 a.m., Boston Logan issued a compliance hold on all Astronorth departures. The impact was immediate and rippling. Internal auditors scrambled to review all recent incidents. Crisis Communications began crafting a possible statement. Investor Relations received 3 separate inquiries within 10 minutes. Still, no one had the full story. Back in Seattle, Naomi sat quietly in the private lounge. Her phone remained face down on the small table beside her. She wasn't scrolling. She wasn't recording. She wasn't even speaking. Her sketchbook sat open again, but she hadn't touched it. She was just staring at the blank space ahead, trying to breathe through the ache sitting in her chest. She didn't know what was happening beyond the airport walls. She didn't know that 3 major airports had paused operations for the airline that had tried to remove her. She didn't know about the red alerts blinking across corporate offices or the frozen accounts that now hung in limbo. She just knew what she felt. Tired, not physically, but emotionally, like she had just run a race she never agreed to. A staff member entered the lounge with a small tray of tea and fruit. Naomi offered a small thank you. Her voice faint. The woman paused, then sat gently across from her. "Can I say something?" she asked. Naomi nodded. "I saw what happened," the woman said. "We all did. I'm sorry." Naomi looked up. "I didn't want anything to happen to her." She whispered, "I just wanted her to believe me, that I belonged in my seat." The woman gave a sad smile. "You shouldn't have to prove you do." They didn't say anything more. At 10:17 a.m., inside Astronorth's crisis war room, the analytics director projected the live ethics score on the wall screen. It had dropped by 16 points in less than half an hour. That number wasn't just a score. It was the foundation for investment eligibility, airport partnerships, and public trust. Scores that fell below the compliance line risked immediate operational restrictions. Red status wasn't theoretical. It was policy. "We need to get ahead of this," the PR director said. "Do we know the name of the passenger involved?" The compliance officer pulled up the manifest. "Passenger 3A, name Naomi Ellison, age 16, emergency contact, Judge Camille Ellison." The room went quiet. "Oh no," someone said under their breath. It was no longer an anonymous incident. It was connected, personal, traceable. They hadn't just wronged a passenger. They had humiliated the daughter of the woman who helped write the very rules they now risked violating. Back in the lounge, Naomi's phone buzzed again. A message from her mother. "They've been notified. You're safe." She believed her. She really did. But she didn't feel safe yet. Not entirely, because safety wasn't just about being protected. It was about not having to be protected in the first place. She turned her phone over and looked at her reflection in the black screen. Then, slowly, she picked up her pencil and drew another line beside the first. Parallel, equal, not louder, just there, together. The private lounge had grown quieter. Naomi could hear the ticking of the analog clock above the beverage bar, soft and insistent, as if measuring something more than just time. Her sketchbook lay open on her lap. The lines she had drawn too now cut across the page like parallel truths, calm but unmoving. Every now and then, she glanced at the entrance, half expecting someone official to appear and tell her it was all a misunderstanding, that it had been handled, that she could reboard the flight as if nothing happened. But no one came. A staffer brought a warm blanket, a small kindness wrapped in polite concern. Naomi accepted it with a nod, though she wasn't cold. The chill she felt came from deeper places. She checked the time. It had only been 20 minutes since she'd left the plane, but the wait-in made it feel like hours. She hadn't called her mom again. Camille had said everything she needed to say in one message. They've been notified. You're safe. And Naomi believed her. But safety felt fragile right now. She kept thinking about that moment on the plane. The second Heather Connors had said the words. The way her voice sliced through the air like a closed door. This cabin isn't for school trips. Naomi hadn't even known how to respond at first. She'd replayed it so many times in her mind already. What if I'd said something different? What if I'd smiled? What if I'd worn something else? Would it have changed her tone? Would it have changed the outcome? Then she stopped herself, because those were the wrong questions. That was the trap. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. A young woman in a gray blazer peeked in. "Miss Ellison," she said gently, "there's a private transport waiting if you'd like to leave the terminal. We've been instructed to offer you another route to Zurich on a partner airline. Or we can delay your travel and arrange accommodations." Naomi looked at her for a long moment. "I just wanted to sit in my seat," she said quietly. The woman nodded. There was a pause. Then she added, "You don't have to decide right now. We're here when you're ready." Naomi thanked her, and the door closed again. She looked down at her sketchbook. Her fingers moved to the pencil. She began shading around the lines. The strokes were soft, almost hesitant. There was no image forming, just space taking shape, stillness made visible. In the corner of the lounge, a TV flickered silently. Closed captions ran across the screen. Breaking FAA confirms Tier 1 compliance review of Astra North Airlines. Naomi didn't read further. Back at Astra North's headquarters, the crisis team sat in full session. Every division was present: legal, public relations, investor management, operations, compliance. A projector glowed on the far wall, showing a dashboard that hadn't stopped updating since the first alert. The ethics score had fallen further. Email inquiries from 3 of their largest ESG investors were piling up. 2 had already requested preliminary audits of the airline's internal training protocols, and 1, quietly but firmly, had frozen a $300 million tranche that was scheduled for release in under 30 days. The CEO, Malcolm Drexler, sat at the head of the table. "Does she know?" he asked. Voice low. The room fell silent. Does the passenger know what's happening on our end? The scope of it? She hasn't posted anything, said the head of communications. She hasn't even spoken to press. But the story's out. What story, Liam Jang? He replied. Business class. Row 3. He posted a video this morning after landing in Boston. Said he watched it unfold from 2 rows back. The clip's short, maybe 2 minutes, but it's clear. He paused. She says, I didn't sneak in. And the flight attendant responds, You don't belong in this cabin. Then the video ends. The CEO exhaled. Slowly. What's the public reaction? Spreading fast? The hashtag #SheBelongs here is climbing in trending lists. Civil rights advocates are already engaging. Media's sniffing. CNN's requested a comment within the hour. Drexler closed his eyes briefly. She didn't ask for this. No. Someone agreed softly. But it's hers now, inside the lounge. Naomi's phone buzzed, not from her mom, a text from her best friend back home. Girl, you're on Twitter. Are you okay? Then another. This video. Naomi, I'm so sorry. Naomi didn't open the app. She just stared at her lock screen. The weight in her chest grew heavier. Not from fear, but from the ache of attention she never asked for. She didn't want a movement. She didn't want to be anyone's symbol. She just wanted to fly to Zurich and sketch at the lakeside. But something had shifted. She could feel it. People were watching now. Not just the ones in the cabin, but outside online. Across terminals. Across time zones. The news didn't use her name. But they said enough. 16-year-old black girl, business class, row 3A. It wouldn't take long. She leaned back in the chair, eyes tracing the curved ceiling of the lounge. Her fingers brushed the corner of her sketchbook. She wasn't angry. Not exactly. She was sad, and that sadness sat quietly with her, not demanding to be heard, but refusing to be ignored. A staffer returned. Miss Ellison, your mother's on the secure line. Naomi stood slowly. The lounge had a private booth for calls. She entered, closed the door, and picked up the receiver. Mom, Camille's voice was steady. I just spoke to the Department of Transportation, she said. The FAA will be issuing a statement soon. It's bigger now. Naomi, but I need you to remember you didn't do anything wrong. Naomi's throat tightened. I didn't want this. I know, Camille said gently, but the system moved because of you, because of how you handled it, not because you were loud, because you didn't move. Naomi didn't respond right away. I didn't feel brave, she admitted. You were never supposed to be. You were supposed to be safe. But sometimes, Naomi, staying still's the bravest thing anyone can do. She closed her eyes. I'm proud of you. The words washed over her like quiet light, and for the first time since she boarded that plane, Naomi felt the corner of her mouth lift, not in victory, not in pride, just in breath. It began with a single tweet. Liam Jang hadn't planned on saying anything. He was a tech executive, not an activist, and certainly not a social commentator. But something about that flight, about the way that girl sat silently while the system worked against her, wouldn't leave him alone. He had watched it all from 3C, just far enough to pretend he hadn't noticed. But he had. Every word, every pause, every expression. So, when he landed in Boston on his connecting flight the next morning and checked his notifications, he found himself replaying the short clip he'd quietly recorded with his phone resting face down on his tray table. It wasn't flashy. There was no shouting, no chaos, just a girl's voice, firm but soft. I didn't sneak in. My ticket says 3A. And then, from the flight attendant, cold and direct, "You don't belong in this cabin." That line echoed in his head all night. He posted the clip with a caption that read simply, "Saw this unfold yesterday on Astronorth Flight 604. A black teenage girl, maybe 16, seated calmly in her assigned business class seat, was humiliated and nearly removed. She handled it with more composure than most adults I know. This should never happen. She belongs here. Hashtag she belongs. Here within 10 minutes, it had 1,000 views. Within an hour, it was in the tens of thousands. By midday, it was viral. The clip spread fast. Civil rights attorneys shared it. Journalists reposted it. Community leaders weighed in. Activists from both coasts started tagging Astronorth and the FAA. By nightfall, the video was playing silently on evening news broadcasts. The face of the girl in 3A was never shown, but everyone could feel her presence. The internet, hungry for justice but aching for truth, clung to the story. The lack of spectacle only made it stronger. No screaming, no recording from her side, just the rawness of what had been captured by someone who chose not to look away. In homes and classrooms, in offices and subway stations, people watched the clip and saw something they recognized: the dismissal, the disbelief, the quiet grace in the face of it, and something stirred. By 8:00 p.m. Eastern, the hashtag #SheBelongs here had reached number 3 in gas, trending. By midnight, it was number 1. Inside Astronorth's corporate tower, the communications team worked without pause. The legal department drafted holding statements. Crisis advisors urged transparency, but the public didn't want a statement. They wanted accountability. They wanted change. Naomi didn't know how fast it was spreading. She had turned her phone off hours ago, not out of protest, just to breathe. She had stayed at a hotel near the airport with her mother's approval. Camille wanted her to rest. No media, no noise, no spotlight, but rest didn't come easily. Lying in bed, Naomi stared at the ceiling, wondering how a moment so quiet could suddenly feel so loud. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't tried to make a point. She just hadn't moved. The next morning, Judge Camille Ellison sat in a closed-door ethics committee meeting in Washington. She wasn't there as Naomi's mother. She was there as the official who had activated the override. Across the table sat representatives from the FAA, the Department of Transportation, and 2 ethics auditors. They were calm, respectful, but curious. Judge Ellison, can you confirm you personally flagged Astronorth's Flight 604 for Tier 1 ethics review? I did, she said plainly. Were you present on the aircraft? No. So the system flagged the crew's behavior solely based on the input, not due to personal bias or familial involvement. Correct? I submitted an override based on my daughter's direct call to me. But I followed procedural protocol. I did not identify the crew member. I did not request action. The system evaluated the behavior in real time. Not the identities, not the relationships. Do you believe the system worked as intended? She didn't hesitate. Yes. The room was quiet. The lead auditor leaned forward. It appears public attention has already outpaced our internal timeline. That is not the system's fault, Camille replied. That's the world reacting to the fact that someone finally listened. The FAA issued a press release 2 hours later, carefully worded, neutral in tone. But the acknowledgement was there. Astronorth Flight 604 is under Tier 1 compliance review following a federal override from Equicor. A preliminary ethics violation was identified by the system. Pending final outcome, all ESG-related disbursements and airport partnerships remain suspended. They didn't mention Naomi. They didn't have to. By then, the internet had already pieced it together. The flight, the timeline, the gate delay, the girl who sat in 3A and didn't move. Someone posted a screenshot of the public manifest. Passenger Naomi Ellison. Seat 3A, emergency contact Judge Camille Ellison. And just like that, the ripple became a wave. News outlets began reaching out to the Ellison family for comment. Camille declined every interview. So did Naomi. But that didn't stop the story. Influencers started using the hashtag. Civil rights historians began threading stories of silent protest. Artists created sketches of an empty seat labeled 3A. One image, a soft drawing of a black girl with a sketchbook in her lap. Eyes straight ahead went viral. No caption, just the visual. She didn't move, but the world did. Naomi sat in the back of the hotel lobby the next day, sipping a tea she didn't finish. Her hood was pulled low. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't check it. She didn't need to see the comments. She didn't need to read the praise or the anger or the questions. She had lived it. And now, she was watching it become something else. A movement, but all she had done was sit. She picked up her pencil again and opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. This time, she drew the cabin, the curve of the fuselage, the back of a headrest, the glint of a window seat. She drew it not from anger, not from spite, but from memory, from truth. Each line carried weight, but no noise, the same way she had. The hearing room was lined in light oak and framed with quiet authority. The lighting was soft but purposeful, designed to avoid spectacle. This wasn't a trial. It wasn't a press event. It was something quieter, but arguably more powerful. A formal inquiry. Judge Camille Ellison sat at the center table. Her hands were folded gently in front of her. She wore a slate gray suit, her shoulders squared, her gaze steady. No makeup beyond clear lip gloss, no jewelry other than her wedding band. Every part of her presence said clarity, not conflict. Across from her sat the board of ethics monitors from the FAA, 2 senior ESG liaison officers, and a congressional observer. None of them looked hostile, but their questions were careful. Their pens moved fast. The lead examiner, a woman in her late 50s with thin glasses and a voice like folded paper, leaned forward. Judge Ellison, can you confirm your override initiated the Tier 1 ethics protocol on Astronorth Flight 604? Yes, Camille replied calmly. And you were not on the flight yourself? I was not. Was the passenger involved personally connected to you? Yes. She's my daughter. There was a pause. And you still believe the system activation was impartial. Camille didn't blink. The override does not remove the system's objectivity. It initiates a deeper review. The system evaluates behavior, not names, not titles, not relations. The examiner nodded, jotting notes. Can you explain what you mean by behavior? Camille's voice remained steady. Equicor was designed to identify patterns of exclusionary conduct in real time. It detects tone, context, language, and environmental response. It looks at cumulative bias markers, not just what was said, but how and when and to whom. It doesn't care if the person affected is my daughter. It only cares if the protocol of equity has been violated. Another member of the board raised a question. There's a growing narrative online that this was favoritism, that you weaponized the system because your daughter was embarrassed. Camille met his eyes. If my daughter had stood up, raised her voice, or caused disruption, the system would have flagged her, not the attendant. If I had entered a name, made a personal request, or interfered with procedure, I would be in this room as a defendant. She paused. I followed protocol, and the system responded accordingly. Outside the building, reporters waited along the stone steps of the Federal Ethics Annex. Microphones stood ready. Camera crews whispered into earpieces, but no one inside gave them what they wanted. No viral quote, no emotion, just facts. Back in Seattle, Naomi watched the coverage from the hotel's quiet business suite. She sat cross-legged on a wide leather couch, a cup of peppermint tea resting on a coaster beside her. Her sketchbook was open, but untouched. She wasn't drawing today. She watched the footage of her mother sitting before that board, calm and unapologetic. There was no anger in Camille's voice, just quiet truth. Naomi felt her throat tighten. She remembered being a little girl, watching her mom walk into courtrooms wearing that same suit, those same low heels, that same patient stillness. People had always asked, is she strict? Naomi never knew how to answer. Her mother wasn't strict. She was disciplined. She had grown up knowing the rules could be bent if you didn't hold your ground, and so she taught Naomi to be still like stone when the wind came. But now Naomi wondered if her mother had been preparing her for this moment all along. Not to fight, to withstand. Her phone buzzed. A news notification. FAA confirms Equicor flagged the flight based on audio markers of discriminatory conduct, not personal identification. Ethics score adjusted independent of passenger identity. Below it, a tweet from a journalist. No names were entered, no requests made. The system didn't defend Naomi Ellison. It responded to behavior. That's what makes it powerful. Another ping. A law professor from New York had shared the clip with a quote, "She didn't demand justice. She invoked protocol. That's the future of reform." Naomi felt her shoulders soften for the first time that day. It wasn't about her name. It was about the seat, the moment, the refusal to move. At Astra North headquarters, the executive board met again. This time, their general counsel joined with a stack of documents. "We're receiving FOIA requests for internal policies," she said. "The public wants transparency." "What's the PR angle?" Malcolm Drexler asked. "Already exhausted. We can't spin this. The public isn't reacting to outrage. They're reacting to restraint." He looked out the window, the Chicago skyline blurred by the morning sun, and the crew member placed on unpaid leave pending final outcome. Do we release her name? The room was silent for a moment. Then the head of public affairs shook her head. No need. The internet will find it anyway. But it's not about her now. It's about us. That night, CNN ran a panel discussion. 3 women, 2 Black and 1 South Asian, all frequent flyers, spoke about the story. This wasn't just about one seat, said the host. This was about what happens when people are treated like exceptions rather than equals. And what happens, added another, when the response isn't a viral scream but a quiet system that actually works. Naomi turned the TV off before it ended. Her eyes were heavy, but her mind was alive. She remembered what the flight attendant had said. "You don't belong in this cabin." At the time, It felt like a personal wound. Now she saw it for what it was, an echo, a statement not just to her, but to so many. She thought of the woman with the baby who always got extra screening, the student who got asked twice if his ID was real, the mother who got offered the wrong seat 3 flights in a row. She thought about how many people had heard the same words in different ways, in different rooms, and had to just sit there, like she had. Except now, for once, the room had answered back, not with noise, but with policy, and that, somehow, felt louder than anything else. The morning after the press conference, Naomi Ellison sat on the balcony of her hotel suite in Rome, a steaming cup of tea cradled in her hands. The sky was painted in soft pastels, as if the sun itself was hesitating to rise too quickly. She had hardly slept. Her body was in Europe, but her mind had never left seat 3A. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel like the girl everyone was talking about. All she felt was the strange weight of attention she hadn't asked for. Her phone buzzed again. Dozens of new messages, some from classmates back in Chicago, others from journalists she didn't know. A few messages were kind. Many were invasive. None of them were from Heather Connors, the flight attendant who still hadn't issued a personal apology. Naomi placed her phone face down. She didn't want to read the world's interpretation of what happened. She lived it. That was enough. Inside the room, Judge Camille Ellison stood near the television. News anchors were still covering the incident with different spins. Some praised the system for functioning ethically. Others speculated about Camille's involvement, hinting that the power dynamic had been abused. But Camille knew better. The override didn't act because of Naomi. It acted because a teenager in business class had been presumed a threat simply because she didn't fit the image some people expected. Naomi stepped inside, her tea untouched. "Do you think she's sorry?" Naomi asked quietly. Camille looked over. "I think she's afraid." She replied. "Is that the same thing?" Camille sighed. "No, but sometimes fear leads to change when apology doesn't." Naomi stared at the TV, where her face wasn't shown, but her initials and seat number were printed like a headline, N.E. Seat 3A. She'd become a symbol, a protocol, an unintentional movement, and all she'd done was make a call. Later that day, as Naomi and Camille prepared to fly home to the United States, the full wave hit. A leaked document from the Department of Aviation Ethics revealed that Astra North Airlines had been placed under a temporary hold from all ESG funding networks. A total of $1.3 billion in funding, expansion rights, and operational credits had been frozen within 48 hours of the flight. It wasn't just corporate blowback. Civil rights organizations began demanding an overhaul of in-flight training programs nationwide. Airports held emergency sessions. Journalists lined the terminals. But for Naomi, it all felt like watching a tide crash in slow motion. At the airport, Naomi and Camille moved discreetly through a private security checkpoint. No press, no announcements. The airline staff greeted them formally, stiffly, unsure how to address the teenager whose silence had triggered an international reckoning. On board. Naomi was quiet. Her seat, this time, had no question mark. There were no side eyes, no tight smiles, no one asked to see her boarding pass. And yet, the stillness didn't feel like progress. It felt like people were scared to be next. As the plane leveled out, Naomi pulled out her sketchbook. Her hand hovered above the page, pencil trembling. She didn't know what to draw. Her art had always been a safe place, but now, It felt politicized, too. If she drew Heather Connors, would people say she was exploiting pain if she drew herself? Would they say she was narcissistic? So she drew clouds, layered, quiet, soft. Midway through the flight, Camille leaned over. "I have to attend a panel when we land. FAA invited me. They're drafting the final framework for what they're calling the Naomi Protocol." Naomi blinked. "They're naming it after me." Camille nodded, not by request, by recognition. Naomi didn't respond right away. "I never asked for this," she said after a moment. "I know," Camille said, "but history never waits for permission. Sometimes it chooses quietly." Naomi turned back to the window. She didn't want her name on a policy. She wanted art school applications and long afternoons at Lincoln Park sketching strangers, but the world had other ideas. Back in Chicago, the story was everywhere. Local schools held assemblies. Students debated the ethics of silence. Teachers used Naomi's experience in lessons about civil liberties, and at Astronorth HQ, the damage control was collapsing. Malcolm Drexler, the CEO, was forced to answer difficult questions. Why did the override get triggered? Why was the protocol so absolute? Why wasn't there a human buffer? Legal advisors scrambled. Investors panicked. More videos surfaced. Passengers began uploading their own experiences, similar microaggressions, smaller moments of bias, times when they were told they didn't belong. A pattern emerged, and with it, a movement. Seat 3A began trending, not just as a hashtag, but as a statement, a symbol of defiance without aggression, dignity without confrontation. By the time Naomi's plane landed, she was already on the homepage of 3 major news outlets. Camille received a message from the Department of Transportation. "We need you in D.C. Final session is Thursday. Will you bring her?" Camille glanced at Naomi, asleep against the window, her sketchbook still open on her lap, filled with clouds. She texted back, "Only if she wants to." That evening, Naomi finally opened her phone. The messages were endless. One from a woman in Atlanta who said her daughter watched the clip and cried. Another from an elderly man who'd been thrown off a flight once just for asking a question. A young boy who wrote, "You made me brave." And then a voice note from someone anonymous. "You didn't yell. You didn't film. You didn't run. You just stayed." And somehow, the whole sky moved. Naomi let the words settle in her chest. She replied with just 2. "Thank you." Because despite the chaos, despite the weight, there was something honest in that note, something she hadn't fully understood until now. The power wasn't in the system. The power was in staying seated when the world expected you to shrink. And, finally, that meant something. Naomi stood in front of the mirror, watching her reflection without speaking. It had been 3 days since the incident, and she still hadn't figured out how she was supposed to feel. Her mother had flown back to D.C. for an emergency summit. The Ethics Oversight Committee had called Camille in to help finalize revisions to the federal flight equity guidelines. But Naomi had stayed behind. She was still in New York, at a quiet midtown hotel tucked between a florist and a bookstore. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions and staff greeted you with soft voices. Naomi needed that. Space, silence, distance from the noise. Her phone lit up on the nightstand. A new message from Liam Jang. He had become something of a constant in the chaos, not in a loud way. He never demanded answers. He simply checked in, gently, steadily. "You okay if I stop by with something, no cameras, just me?" Naomi hesitated, then typed back, Okay. 20 minutes later, she opened the door to find Liam holding a flat, wrapped parcel under one arm and a large brown bag in the other. "Brought coffee," he said, "and something else. Don't worry, it's not from the internet." Naomi gave a small smile and stepped aside. They sat together on the balcony as the city hummed below them. Naomi wrapped her hands around the cup, breathing in the warmth. For a while, they didn't speak. Finally, Liam slid the wrapped parcel toward her. "This came to my office this morning," he said. "I think you should be the one to see it first." Naomi opened it carefully. Inside was a canvas, an oil painting, a simple image, a teenage girl seated in a business-class cabin, hands folded in her lap, a small book resting beside her. Her eyes were cast downward, her posture composed. Around her, the outlines of other passengers were blurred, but she was in full detail. At the bottom corner, the artist had signed it, 3B. Naomi stared at it for a long moment. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Liam nodded. "The artist said it's part of a series now. They're calling it Stillness, paintings of people in quiet protest. Not with fists, not with signs, just by existing where others say they shouldn't." Naomi looked away, her throat tight. "I didn't protest anything. I just didn't move." "Exactly," Liam said, and that mattered. Later that day, a notification flashed on Naomi's phone. Camille had sent a clip from the FAA panel live stream. The new flight ethics resolution had just passed. The document was titled Standardized Passenger Equity Enforcement Informal Name, the Naomi Protocol. Naomi blinked. There it was, her name, on paper, in law. She didn't know whether to feel honored or overwhelmed, maybe both. The protocol included several major reforms, real-time compliance AI accessible to all cabin crew, with mandatory override training, anonymous red flag capability for passengers, reviewed by independent ethics monitors, zero retaliation policy for passengers raising legitimate concerns. Most importantly, the document required every participating airline to publicly display the following sentence, printed in both text and braille. "No seat grants more dignity than another. Every seat belongs to someone who matters." Naomi read the sentence again, then again. Something inside her softened. Back at Astra North headquarters, things were less peaceful. Heather Connors had been officially dismissed following the investigation. The airline's initial defense that the incident had been a misunderstanding was no longer tenable. Emails surfaced, comments made, a trail of internal complaints that revealed a pattern of biased behavior. Malcolm Drexler had no choice but to issue a public apology. At a press conference 2 days later, he stood before a wall of microphones, face weary, voice somber. "We failed," he said. "We failed to uphold the dignity of every traveler. We failed to protect our values in the air and on the ground. And, most personally, we failed Naomi Ellison." The statement was carefully worded, but for once, the sentiment felt genuine. Meanwhile, Naomi's story had spread far beyond news cycles. Teachers discussed it in classrooms. Artists were painting it. Filmmakers wanted to option it. And yet, Naomi stayed grounded. Her mother had taught her early on that movements weren't about being seen, they were about helping others see. That weekend, Naomi returned to Chicago. It was cloudy when she landed, and as the wheels touched the runway, she felt a quiet shift in her chest. She had left home as a girl who wanted nothing more than to blend in quietly at 30,000 feet. She returned as a symbol of something bigger than herself. Her sketchbook was heavier now, full of drawings she hadn't shared with anyone. She had drawn faces, moments, feelings, each page a mirror of the quiet dignity she had carried when others tried to strip it from her. Outside the terminal, Camille was waiting. They embraced without words. As they drove home, Naomi looked out at the skyline, the familiar hum of traffic filling the air. Camille glanced over. "You ready for what comes next?" Naomi shrugged. "What does come next?" Camille smiled gently. "Whatever you choose to make of it." Naomi sat quietly on the train heading from Chicago's O'Hare Airport to her neighborhood on the south side. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks provided a steady backdrop to her swirling thoughts. Outside the window, the city blurred steel beams, graffiti walls, familiar neighborhoods rushing past. But Naomi was inside her own head, far from the moving world. Her sketchbook lay open on her lap. This time, it was filled with drawings of faces she had seen on the plane and since the flight attendant with the sharp glare. The businessman 2 rows back who had whispered encouragement. The young woman in yellow who had offered her a quiet smile in the lounge. Each sketch held a story she wasn't ready to tell out loud yet. She thought about the moments on the plane when silence had become her shield and her weapon. The words Heather Connors had said replayed in her mind. "You don't belong in this cabin." They hadn't just been words, they had been an attempt to erase her existence in that space. But Naomi had refused to be erased. When she got off the train, the familiar cityscape greeted her: brownstones lined with trees, kids playing basketball in the street, the hum of life she'd known all her life. It was grounding, yet different. She realized she was changed, even if the city remained the same. At home, her mother was already waiting, reading a thick dossier. The latest FAA report had arrived, detailing the full investigation into the Astra North incident. The report was thorough, but one phrase stood out: a systemic failure to enforce passenger dignity with equity. Camille looked up as Naomi entered. "It's been released publicly," she said. "The airline's been fined $11 million, and their ethics score remains frozen pending ongoing audits." Naomi nodded, feeling a weight lift, but also settle differently. "It's not just about the fine," Camille continued. "It's about the statement this sends. That dignity is non-negotiable." Naomi closed her sketchbook. "Do you think Heather understands what she did?" Camille hesitated. "Sometimes people don't see themselves in the damage they cause, but the system will remind them." That evening, Naomi's phone buzzed again. It was a message from a high school teacher she hadn't spoken to in years. "Your courage is teaching a generation." She stared at the words, unsure how to respond. Courage felt like a heavy word for sitting still, but maybe that was exactly it. The next day, Naomi was invited to speak at a local community center. The event was small, just a gathering of teens and parents. The organizers wanted her to share her experience, to inspire. But Naomi didn't want to be a symbol. She wanted to be real, standing before the crowd. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but she began softly. "I don't want to talk about the flight," she said. "I want to talk about all the places where people are told they don't belong every day. Not because of what they've done, but because of who they are." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. She spoke of schools where students felt invisible, of stores where customers were followed, of buses where people sat apart from the rest. It's easy to feel small when the world tells you to be, but what I learned is that sometimes staying still and owning your space is the loudest thing you can do. The room was silent, the weight of her words settling like a warm blanket. Afterwards, a young girl approached her, shy but determined. "Will you sign my sketchbook?" she asked. Naomi smiled. Of course. As she signed, she looked up and saw not just a fan, but a reflection, a spark, a hope. Later that week, a documentary filmmaker reached out. They wanted to tell Naomi's story not as a sensational headline, but as a quiet journey of resilience. Naomi thought about it. Maybe her silence could become a voice after all. She picked up her pencil and began to draw once more. This time, it was a sketch of herself, seated firmly in seat 3A, eyes steady, ready. The day of the National Aviation Reform Summit arrived quietly, with a soft breeze brushing the marble columns of the Whitehall ballroom. Inside, the room buzzed with anticipation. Industry leaders, lawmakers, journalists, and advocates filled the seats, waiting for the keynote speakers. The air was thick with a mixture of urgency and hope. Backstage, Naomi Ellison stood with her mother, Judge Camille Ellison. Both wore simple, elegant outfits. Naomi in jeans and a soft white blouse, Camille in a navy suit tailored just so. Neither seemed nervous. Their presence carried a calm strength that no words could capture. The summit had become more than a conference. It was a reckoning, a turning point. The culmination of a ripple started by a girl who refused to move from her seat. Naomi looked out at the crowd. She saw faces she recognized from news clips, from panels, from articles. Some faces were expectant. Some were skeptical. Many carried the weight of past failures in the industry, but all were here to witness change. Camille leaned in and whispered, "Remember, you don't owe them a story. You owe yourself peace." Naomi nodded. When the moderator called their names, the room hushed. Cameras zoomed in, microphones lifted. Naomi and Camille stepped forward together. Naomi's voice was steady, clear. "I didn't plan to be the center of attention. I didn't want to be a headline. I just wanted to fly to Zurich and sit in my seat like anyone else." She paused, letting the silence stretch. But when I was told I didn't belong, something shifted. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about all the people who have been told that same thing in different ways in schools, in workplaces, in their own homes. The audience listened intently. Camille took the podium next. "Our flight equity system, the Naomi Protocol, is not a tool of punishment. It is a promise that no person will have to fight to be seen. That dignity is not reserved for the privileged or the loudest. It belongs to every passenger, in every seat, on every flight." She looked at her daughter. Naomi stayed in her seat with quiet courage, and that courage moved the skies. After their speech, the summit featured the official unveiling of the new Federal Ethics Monitoring Program, modeled after Naomi's incident. Airlines nationwide committed to transparent reporting, mandatory racial bias training, and real-time compliance oversight. Outside the ballroom, reporters asked Naomi for interviews. She smiled gently, but declined most requests. She wasn't ready to be a public figure. Later, in a quiet corner of the lobby, a young girl approached her. "Are you the girl who changed the planes?" Naomi knelt down to meet her eyes. "I'm just someone who stayed in her seat." The girl nodded. "I want to be brave like you." "You already are," Naomi said softly. "Remember, you don't have to move unless you want to." That evening, Naomi returned home with her mother. The city skyline glittered under the setting sun. It was a new sky, one reshaped by silent strength and persistent hope. Naomi opened her sketchbook and began to draw. This time, It was not just a girl in seat 3A, but a sky full of seats, each occupied by a story, a person, a dignity affirmed. Her pencil moved with quiet purpose. The world had shifted, and so had she. Naomi Ellison's story reminds us that the quietest voices often carry the most profound strength. Her refusal to move, her dignity in the face of unjust humiliation, sparked a reckoning that no amount of money could silence. It's a powerful call to recognize the invisible battles fought every day against bias and discrimination, not just in the air, but in every corner of our lives. As we reflect on this story, let us celebrate Naomi's courage and the tireless fight of those who stand for justice without fanfare. At the same time, we must continue to call out the systems and actions that allow such injustice to persist. If Naomi's story moved you, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more stories that challenge, inspire, and ignite change. Your voice matters in this fight. Stay tuned for our next video where we bring you another unforgettable journey that will touch your heart and open your eyes. Thank you for watching, and remember, every seat belongs to someone who matters.